Chapter 25. Fire! Fire! Run, you dogs! Go! Men already pushed to their limits by hours of exhausted marching now broke out into a run, knees lifting and arms swinging. Officers ran alongside the formation, shouting curses and insults as they brandished whips and clubs. In the distance, the night sky turned orange, smoke and flame billowing high into the air, backlighting the silhouettes of buildings. Even though they were miles away, the smell of burning wood, and stranger still, fried food from the cooking oil reached them. Back to camp, where there is still one to save. As they ran, those among them with breath enough to speak asked aloud if the town itself were under attack. Stripped of arms and armor for the training exercise, they worried about the very real possibility of running straight into an army laying in wait amongst the tall, waving grass of the plains. They huddled closer together, the ones left on the outside of the formations continuing to glance sideways at the countryside streaming past. The dancing flames casting long shadows that preyed on the fears of overtired men and their active imaginations. They feared that at any moment, Salamnic knights would leap from the grass and come storming into their lines, polished swords flashing as they set about their butcher's work. Turf worked his way to the outside of the group, the others freely allowing him to pass from the safety of the pack so that they might squeeze in a bit closer. Soon he started to slow his pace and fell behind the others. No one called words of encouragement to him to try and keep pace. Pressed close enough to the outside of the pack, the outriding officers failed to notice the one body in a sea of bodies slower than the tide. The city grew larger and larger in their vision until soon a man could not take it all in without panning his head from one side to the other. Seeing his chance was about to slip away, Turf drifted off further to the side until he was almost within the tall waving grass before he allowed himself to trip and fall to the ground, screaming as something rushed up to meet him. "No, no! It's got me!" He screamed in abject terror as he pulled up his legs to bunch them beneath himself, his toes digging into the dirt. As the last of the formation turned at the sound of his screams, he leapt up, throwing himself backwards as though something of terrible inhuman strength had seized him. "Help!" Turf cried as he disappeared into the long grass. The night, the heat, the flames of a burning city all played on the minds of those present, giving his performance a credence it might not have had otherwise. Far from rushing to investigate and help save their comrade, the men broke into a wild frenzy, screaming about the terrors waiting for them in the long grass as they lapped around the sides of the formation, pushing themselves to run harder and leave others in the rear to be picked off by the unseen phantoms stalking them. Panic spread like a crashing wave along the formation, moving from the back to the front. Men punched and elbowed each other out of the way, knocking each other over to be trampled by the men following behind. Officers that tried to restore any semblance of order were soon relieved of their weapons, which were quickly turned upon them. Revenge for previous beatings and lashings carried out in the open, where no one would see, as each was blinded by his own panic. "By the gods!" Turf breathed as he slowly rose to his feet to see the vista spread out before him. Where before there had been hard-packed dirt, now bloodied and broken bodies paved the roads. Twisted limbs reached skyward, and blood-caked mouths hoarsely whispered for mothers long forgotten and unseen to appear by their sides in their final moments. Among the long grass, others rose slowly to their feet, as Turf imagined the dead rising from their graves in the stories told around the campfire in the days of his childhood, when men took cruel delight in filling young minds with nightmarish thoughts before ordering them off to their bedrolls to toss and turn as they jumped at every noise and imagined terror. The silhouettes stumbled out into the road to move among the dead and dying. They swatted aside the hands that reached for them, seeking comfort in their final moments, dipping into pockets and pouches. Tunics and shirts were torn down from the collar to see if they concealed necklaces or charms. Though it had not been their plan, the survivors were taking advantage of the situation to desert the pitiless employ of the Dark Queen's army. Fearing he would be targeted next for the crime of simply being a witness to these proceedings, Turf ducked back down among the tall grass until he heard the last of them shuffling off. He allowed himself time to catch his breath. Stretching out onto his back, he looked up to the night sky above. Uncountable numbers of stars shone and twinkled. His heartbeat slowed, the pain and fatigue leaving his limbs. He knew at some point he would have to get up and push on before he ran the risk of drifting off into deepest slumber. Let that horrible town with its cawing seabirds, rotten fish winds, and terror-filled tunnels burn until it collapsed down into itself and only a cinder-filled pit remained. Quick, quick, it awakens! The Minotaur heard the voice calling insistently nearby as its eyelids fluttered open. It stared up at the ceiling as flickering oil lamps cast their light to dance along the mosaic vista above. The temple had been long forgotten by the people of Haltagoth, having been built in ages past, before slowly being covered over by successive generations of buildings, each raised upon the covered rubble of the last, until many feet of variously coloured sediment had been laid like the marble chocolate cake of a dreaming god. The servants of the Dark Queen had followed the rumours, agents sent in secret to libraries and archives throughout the land until its location had been discovered. Work crews had been sent into the sewer system, supervised by pale creatures in flowing black robes, who had directed where to dig, until the entrance had once again been uncovered. Seals broken and stones turned aside, they paused to breathe air that had last filled the lungs of magic users in ages past, savouring the taste of the very history of the place. The workers had entered with wide-eyed awe, casting their headlamps around at the ancient carvings of serpentine dragons spiralling along columns, eldritch engraved wards, and in the centre of the main room, before a stone altar of black marble, inlaid with bands of gold, a pit that loomed as the open mouth of a deep-sea predator. The workers realised too late that their work was not yet complete when they turned to leave and saw the line of hooded figures standing unmoving in their path. The good people of Haltagoth never heard their cries of terror and agony, as their silence and sacrifice were taken as a terrible offering to consecrate the temple anew. Lightning arced from crooked stabbing fingers, limbs were snapped by giant invisible hands, and those that managed to run did not make it more than a few feet before they burst into flame. The fat beneath their skin superheating in an instant, to burst through as sizzling fuel for the candle that they had become as they tripped and fell into the pit in their blinding, agonizing panic, tumbling end over end until they were mere motes of light. Huh? Trying to find its voice, it stumbled over its words before letting out a long bellow. More figures appeared within its eye line, peering down at its face and along its body. He was unsure about what they were checking, for as his eyes were drawn back to the mosaic, he found his eyes drawn first to the pale face of a woman looking down at a form being cradled in its arms. The eyes appeared to be polished obsidian that made them glisten with life. Sensuous lips slightly parted to reveal the tips of ivory fangs. Her dark hair flowed in all directions in waves as though she were underwater. Her nude form reclined on a couch, an arm cradling an infant in its swaddling cloth. "We are her children." The voice startled the Minotaur from his reverie, a hand quickly placed onto his chest in a calming gesture. "Do not fear, for you are safe here among us. You have been chosen by her." The Minotaur turned to consider the figure addressing them, the usually stoic expression dropped, betraying its confusion. "You have been brought to this temple, your body broken." They remembered the agonizing pain they had endured at the hands of the human. "Our clerics prayed to our Dark Queen to bestow her blessings upon you." They realized they were now no longer in pain. Flexing, they felt their muscles rippling full and hard under skin pulled taut. Their chest rose as they sucked in a deep breath, incense filling their nostrils. "She has seen fit to restore that which was broken, blessing it with her immeasurable powers to make it stronger than you have ever known. Rise, Blessed One." The Minotaur lifted themselves up the smooth stone slab into a seating position before swinging their legs over the side. They reached a hand back and felt how warm the stone was, and could not be sure if it was entirely due to the heat of their body being transferred, or if something else warmed it from within. Pushing off from the slab, their hooves clicked on the inlaid stone tiles. Drawing themselves up to their full height, they towered over the figures around them. Pure, raw power coursed through their veins, the hair standing up on the back of their neck. They felt like they could have gripped the very columns that supported this place and pulled them toppling to the ground if they so desired. While the other figures shuffled warily, the one who had been addressing them stepped closer. "Your queen has anointed you to be her champion in her hour of greatest need." The Minotaur looked down and saw the cowl of the man's robe had fallen back to reveal the violet eyes that burned within their own inner light. "Will you heed your mother's call, blessed one?" The maternal request struck a chord deep within its heart. They had been separated from their own mother at such a young age, torn from her warm, loving embrace, lest he grow weak and soft. Little warmth or comfort had he known since he had endured the painful trials and harsh living conditions of his people, designed to turn him into a bull worthy of the terrifying, blood-soaked reputation of the countless generations which had come before him. Now here, at long last, was the mother he had been searching for ever since he had been ripped from the embrace of the one that had birthed him. He offered his outstretched hand, his palm turned upward. The figure laid his own gently on top. It seemed like that of an infant in comparison. As their skin connected, the pact was sealed. A great wave moved through the Minotaur, starting in their feet to spread rapidly through their calves. They shivered as their loins tingled, the rolling wave of power running up along their spine until it reached the base of their skull. Closing their eyes, their mouth yawned open as they tilted their head back. Breathing deeply, they savored the air in their lungs as a pipe smoker, having taken their first long drag of their dried herbs. Releasing their breath slowly, they opened their eyes, and the world was not the same as it had been before. Phantom humanoid shapes phased in and out at the edges of their vision. The writings carved into the walls of the temple suddenly made sense. Had they been under the open sky, they would have been able to see Nuratari in all of its majesty. "Damn you all to the abyss! Where are you lot taking me?" Janix burst into the room, accompanied by an armed escort of Draconians. At a wave of the high priest, they bowed in revered obedience before backing out of the chamber, never turning to present their backs until they had crossed over the threshold. "So this is why I'm here," Janix commented as he gestured toward the Minotaur. "You have healed my steed, so that I may ride off in hot pursuit after that little bitch that nearly blinded me." Stepping forward with his usual customary arrogance, he waved his hand, gesturing for the Minotaur to lower itself down. "Bend the knee, boy. I'll have to ride you bareback until we get to the surface where I can scrounge up a saddle." It did not move. It did not speak. It simply held its ground and stared with impassive eyes at the man-thing which had so grievously injured it before. Janix bristled at the beast, not playing along with his jest, when he could have ordered it to lick his boots, lest he punish it worse than before. "That's quite enough, Janix." He whirled to face the hooded figure. He was used to giving the orders and not receiving them. True, there were many within the camp he would have to report to if they so required. That was why he had chosen to lead the training of the new recruits, where he was left alone to terrorize the fresh meat so long as he produced the required results. "You have not been brought here to inspect your new mount, as you so eloquently put it." Janix appeared confused and enraged, on the verge of seizing this bookworm by the throat, the speed of his departure dictating how savage the beating which would ensue. "The Dark Queen has restored your sight, so that you might better see how you have displeased her, and the punishment which awaits all who have failed her." Janix spun at the sound of a hoof clicking down on the stone floor behind him. Huge hands shot forward to seize his arms at the elbows, lifting him into the air as easily as he himself might have a newborn babe. "Unhand me, you farmyard fool!" Janix bellowed into the Minotaur's face. "Cattle-clawed, brain-dead bull!" The Minotaur tilted its head to the side for a moment to contemplate its prey, before it spun him around to face him. Forcing his elbows behind his back until it almost touched, he began to lift him into the air. Janix strained to arch his back, trying to ease the pressure on his shoulders, screaming as they threatened to pop from their sockets. "Damn you! Ah!" Janix screamed as the pressure increased. Drawing him in closer until his face almost touched his own muzzle, the Minotaur flexed his chest muscles, torquing the elbows higher and closer together. A high-pitched squeal ripped from Janix's throat as both shoulders dislocated at the same time. Tendons snapping off from their anchoring points on the bone as muscle fibers ripped like cheap cloth. Releasing his grip on him, Janix fell to the ground. Unable to arrest his fall, he collapsed, smashing his knees before toppling to the side, where his head whipped down into the ground with a sickening crunch. Yes, yes, be her instrument of judgment. The figure cried as it stabbed a finger towards the crumpled form on the ground between them. Stepping forward, the sound of his hoof clicking on the tile suddenly roused Janix, who tried to wiggle away for a second before a hoof caught him in the chest with a vicious kick that lacerated his flesh, the cloven edge snapping the ribs underneath, driving them into his lungs and other organs. Janix barked up a glob of blood. The Minotaur loomed over him, a leg rearing back to deliver another kick. The broken body did not move anymore, its chest no longer rising or falling. More blood ran from its open mouth, the gathering pool widening until even that trickle stopped. Excellent, excellent. Truly she works through you, Blessed One. The honorific felt good to his ears. Blessed One. The man moved closer, drawing the Minotaur in, who stooped to hear as though they were entering into a conspiracy of some kind. War rages above us, even as we speak. The Minotaur's eyes flitted to the mosaic in the ceiling, expecting it to rumble and shake. The temple remained a calm and cool oasis, unaffected by the chaos raging above it as it had through the cataclysm which had entombed it underground centuries before. Agents of the light have moved against our army, assassinating officers, setting fires to food stores, and summoning creatures of unknown and terrible origin, as they are too cowardly themselves to attack our soldiers as they return to the city unarmed from their march. Honor in combat was a cornerstone of a Minotaur's upbringing, drummed into them from the time they are weaned from their mothers. Blowing a loud breath out of his nose, he turned back to the hooded man. Return to the surface. You will know the way as though you had walked it 100 times before. Find the agents of the light and bring them here to our most holy of places so that our dark queen may have her revenge. Reflected fire blazed in the Minotaur's eyes as it drew itself up to its full height, knuckles cracking as its muscles bunched and tensed. Turning like an automaton, it strode from the temple with quick, determined strides, breaking into a run as it passed over the threshold. Hooded figures pressed themselves against the walls of the passages as he passed each, exclaiming the same 2 words in his wake. Blessed One. He felt himself growing stronger each time he heard it. Blessed One. The anger burning in his heart a little hotter. Blessed One. Bursting onto the surface streets as a whale breaches the water, he skidded to a halt for a moment to survey the pandemonium around him. People ran in all directions, carrying bundles of their meager possessions or buckets of water to be thrown ineffectively onto the thirsting flames. They cowered in fear when they saw him, steering in wide berths around his gigantic form. Smoke choked the air as ash and cinders swirled as snow in a blizzard. Unknowing of the force that compelled him, the Minotaur turned seemingly at random and took off running down a street, its arms pumping by its side as its cloven hooves clacked a rapid-fire drumbeat along the cobblestones.